Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Mercedes' teenage prodigy.
Side by side then with Colapinto.
Big moment of brinkmanship. Antonelli gets there. Antonelli gets by.
Kimi Antonelli diving to the inside. We come to it at that point. What a bold move.
At just 18, he's already in the silver era, replacing the likes of a 7-time world champion and showing why he's special after his debut in Australia. Kimi Antonelli is the teenage prodigy that's been talked about for years, and now we're finally witnessing it in Formula 1. Today we're going to dive into Kimi's driving style, evolved from his really karting years to his F2 season, and now his first laps in 2025. Why it's so fast and so good, and really, if given the right car, he could be ready to dominate and win titles in the future. Wanted to thank you guys for all the support. It's been ridiculous in this start up to the season. If you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe and like. Your guys' support means everything, and we're getting closer to that 100K, which is just unbelievable. But I've been waiting to cover this for Kimi. We finally have enough data to go over, and really now the footage, to talk about Kimi Antonelli's driving style. If you haven't heard of him before, you'll hear of him plenty in 2025. His young karting career was nothing but spectacular. He won in pretty much any tournament or cup, finishing 15 times in first place in the standings while karting in his career. Now, for all these Formula 1 drivers, they do adapt their style plenty after karting, but that is where most of their instinct comes from, and it still does translate to the Formula 1 cars nowadays. For example, Lewis Hamilton's famous late braking style started with karting, with his dad stepping back a couple of feet from where the other drivers were braking at, and he was braking even harder than all of those who took the normal braking approach. This now adapted to his style in Formula 1. It's obviously famous. And Kimi actually has a hint of Lewis and Max Verstappen in his driving style. It's pretty ridiculous. Multiple team principals and really the personnel around finding these talents noted that Kimi in the wet was ridiculous, especially in his karting years. He was aggressive, but also very precise on the lines that he was finding, and bold. He just had the balls to go for the moves, kind of like Max nowadays. But if we fast forward to 2024, where he skips F3 to go into Formula 2 with Prema, a bold move definitely for Mercedes to fast track their real star. He gets into a Formula 2 car, 620 horsepower, no power steering, and a new car design that pretty much threw off everybody that year. It was a sink or swim season. Yes, there was so much hype around him, but he had to live up to it. But he definitely swam. His first win came at Silverstone in a wet sprint race, yet again, rain being involved just like his debut here in Australia. Another very notable race was in Hungary. It was a feature race win from P7, and honestly he was making overtakes in spots that we have never seen. His feel for the car on the brakes is pretty ridiculous, even when really the Prema was struggling very badly in Formula 2 in that season. The grid was also stacked, might I add. I mean, we have 6 different rookies in this season if you consider Lawson and Oliver Behrman, but not too bad for an 18-year-old stacking up his first time in an F2 car. We definitely learned a lot about Kimi's style here in Formula 2, and one of those secrets is adaptability. And yes, every Formula 1 driver has a hint of adaptability towards their style, otherwise they wouldn't be in F1. But considering the wild different challenges he's had in his career and how quickly he's adjusted, it's definitely one of his strengths. His Spa wet weather pass, going into one of the most dangerous corners of our calendar year, was an example of really pure instinct and bravery to really go for a move in that corner. Now yes, Franco had to be compliant here, otherwise they both would have been off track, but it takes real kahunas to go for a move here. He really honed in his racing lines from karting, and that really helped in the wet. And pretty much like Max, he finds grip where others don't, like in Silverstone and Spa for these examples. He's aggressive, but yet again controlled when going through these conditions. Now if we look to 2025 for Kimi Antonelli in Formula 1, there's a lot of things now that we've seen in his driving style that makes him very unique to the rest of the grid, but also hints of other championship drivers. Albert Park was always going to be a brutal awakening for plenty of rookies there, and for Kimi, it was a challenge going into qualifying and even the practice sessions. He ends up damaging the car in qualifying, putting himself pretty far back in the race, but through pure control and really being super precise on those brakes, he ends up making magic happen and finishes in P4. Now in this race, if you were observing very carefully, he was braking later than pretty much everybody else, and while he was going through the traffic and making those overtakes, he was up to pace with George Russell himself, wet clean air pretty much the whole race. As soon as the rain hits and really chaos ensues, Kimi's skills kick in, and yes, while he did have one mistake that made him spin, and it definitely had him thinking for a moment, he did catch the car, continued his race, and there were no signs of letting up, like slowing down because of the mistake. His driving style is fast, adaptable, and fearless, and this really helps him in those wet conditions. To have that precise braking, where he does say that his style is very similar to that of Lewis, where he brakes super late into the corners and likes that early turn-in, there are also signs of Verstappen because to do that, like Lewis Hamilton in his early years, who also had somewhat of a similar style to that of Max, these styles, they end up colliding a lot. And Kimi has really made the most out of them when rotating his car, because Max likes to brake early, but has to have a lot of front rotation and a strong front end to really be able to make the most out of those exits, while Lewis brakes as hard as possible to gain most of his speed in the braking zones. Here in Australia, especially turn 4 is where I noted Kimi Antonelli making up the most time on really any car that he came up behind. And he was super precise on when he was on throttle, and his modulation of the throttle is super slick. The overtake he made on Alex Albon on turns 10 and 11 just shows off how fearless the kid really is. In his aggressive nature in turning, it does seem like he likes a bit of oversteer in the car, but there were times earlier on in his career where he was driving cars with a lot of understeer. Really, any car that's not a Formula 1 car pretty much has inherent understeer. And with a sprained wrist, ended up winning and adapting his style. So right now, it's hard to tell whether he likes a bit of oversteer or understeer. For me, it looks like it's oversteer. But yet another showing of his adaptability to the car in any condition. With the backing of Mercedes and really this debut, I do think he's going to have a very successful career, and the style itself shows off a lot of reminiscence of previous driver champions. There is one thing that we can note that is a negative as of right now, but will change as he's in the sport longer and longer, is how he is on the tires. He's not as precise as somebody like George Russell or Lando Norris, for example, or even Max Verstappen. And there are hints of how Oscar Piastri was in his first 2 years. But this definitely seems to be a pretty steep learning curve here in Formula 1, as these tires are super sensitive, and it's not like previous seasons where you could just push as much as possible. It's all about being good on the tires, and if your car can actually allow you to do that. Balance is important, and Kimi has a very aggressive driving style, but so does Leclerc. Leclerc is super aggressive going on turn-in and still very good at conserving his tires, because in the race there's really only one style you need. It's got to be pretty smooth, and that aggression really comes out in qualifying and depending on the weather, because in the wet, it's up to you to make up time. The kid is good. You got to give it to him, and he definitely showed off in Australia, and I'm really excited what else he can do. What are your guys' thoughts? What do you guys think of his driving style? Do you think he's going to be special in the future? Because I definitely think so. So please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.